October 12, 1943. Somewhere over the stormy skies of the European theater, Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Harper gripped the control yoke of his P-51 Mustang, his knuckles whitening under the strain. The whine of the engine, the roar of the propeller, the rattle of the canopy glass under enemy fire, it all blended into a symphony of tension that had become the soundtrack of his life over the past 6 months. Harper had flown dozens of missions over occupied France, escorting bombers to their targets, dodging flak, and dancing with Messerschmitts in the thin blue sky. But today felt different. Today carried a weight that even the adrenaline of combat couldn't shake. He glanced down at the small envelope tucked into the inner pocket of his flight jacket. It was heavy with significance. Not with money, or orders, or intelligence reports, but with words. Words written by his own hand the night before he knew a mission could be his last. Words meant for someone he might never see again. A letter to his younger sister, Mary, back home in Pittsburgh. He had written it with the trembling hope of a man who understood the razor-thin line between life and death. Harper knew every sortie could be his last. The Luftwaffe, flak batteries, and the harsh winter winds over the channel were merciless, indifferent executioners. He exhaled slowly, letting the icy air from the high-altitude cabin fill his lungs. Below him, the clouds churned like spilled ink over the fields and forests of France. Somewhere in the darkness, German fighters lurked. Somewhere below, towns burned from bombing runs, innocent lives caught in the crossfire of a war that had no mercy for anyone, friend or foe. Yet Harper felt a strange calm amidst the storm. This was the life he had chosen, the duty he had sworn to uphold. And yet, the human part of him, the part that longed for home, for love, for simple things, was ever present, gnawing quietly beneath his military resolve. The memory of Mary's laughter echoed in his mind. The way she used to throw herself across the living room carpet, pretending to be a daring spy, a trickster, a hero of her own adventures. Jimmy had promised her, when he left for Europe, that he would survive. That he would come back. That he would write letters whenever he could, and that someday, all of this, the chaos, the death, the destruction, would end. But promises were fragile things in wartime. He had learned that every man who made them carried the risk of breaking them with a single miscalculated maneuver, a single burst of gunfire, a single misstep. The Mustang dipped slightly as a gust of wind swept under the wing. Harper adjusted the controls, his eyes scanning the horizon for the dark silhouettes of enemy aircraft. The radio crackled to life. Flight leader, this is base. Target in sight. Expect heavy flak over Rouen. Proceed with caution. Harper's jaw tightened. Rouen. That city had already seen too much death. But duty called. The mission had to be completed, or hundreds of bomber crews would pay the ultimate price. He glanced at his squadron, the young faces behind him, some barely out of their teens, some hardened by months of unrelenting combat. He had come to care for them, not just as fellow soldiers but as brothers in a war that demanded more than courage, it demanded sacrifice. He reached into his jacket, fingers brushing the envelope again. He whispered her name under his breath, Mary. The letter was folded neatly, edges crisp, ink slightly smudged from nervous hands. In it, he had written about nothing of strategy or combat specifics. He couldn't risk interception revealing military intelligence, but he had written everything of the heart, his fears, his hopes, his love. He wrote of the mornings back home, of their dog running in the yard, of the smell of her mother's baking. He wrote that he believed in returning, but he also wrote the truth, the honesty of a man who knew that in war, sometimes faith was all a soldier had left. Below him, the clouds parted for a moment, revealing the patchwork of fields and forests of northern France. Harper's mind wandered briefly to the farm where he had grown up, to the quiet streets of Pittsburgh, to the warmth of home he had left behind. He let the thought linger, it was a small comfort before the storm. Suddenly, The sound of twin-engine bombers droning in the distance brought him back to the present. The B-17 flying fortresses were approaching their target, engines humming with determination and fear. Harper adjusted his formation, the squadron slicing through the sky in precise arcs. Every pilot knew their role. Every pilot knew the cost of failure. And in this dance of life and death, Harper felt a profound weight settle on his shoulders, the lives of the men behind him, the success of the mission, and the fragile hope that he might survive to write another letter to Mary. The first bursts of flak erupted like deadly fireworks over the city of Rouen. Bright orange blossoms against the gray sky, streaking toward the bombers like punishment from the heavens. One of the lead bombers shuddered violently. Harper's Mustang rolled into action, weaving through the sky, his eyes scanning for Luftwaffe fighters taking advantage of the chaos. 2 Messerschmitts appeared in the distance, black silhouettes against the clouded sun. Harper tightened his grip on the yoke. He remembered his training, the drills, the hours in the simulator, the advice of older pilots who had survived more missions than he could count. He was ready. He had to be. Dogfights erupted. Tracers lanced across the sky. Engines roared in defiance and fury. Harper dove, banked, rolled, firing bursts from his 6.50 caliber machine guns. The Messerschmitts twisted and turned, evading some rounds, falling to others. Smoke trailed from one enemy aircraft as it spiraled downward, disappearing into the clouds below. Harper's heart pounded, a mix of terror and exhilaration, as he engaged in a deadly ballet with the enemy. Amidst the chaos, he thought of the letter again. He imagined Mary reading it someday, imagining his voice as she read the words he had written with such care, such love, such longing. The thoughts steadied him, even as bullets tore through the sky around him. Each pull of the trigger, each evasive maneuver, was now intertwined with the hope that he might keep his promise to her, that the words on that paper might reach her eyes, unbroken by the cruelty of war. The bombing run concluded, but the danger was far from over. Enemy aircraft continued to stalk the sky. Flak rained down in deadly arcs. Harper and his squadron executed their exit strategy, skimming over the countryside, weaving through valleys, diving and climbing in an intricate pattern to avoid detection and destruction. Every second stretched into eternity. Every movement carried the weight of life or death. And through it all, the letter remained in his jacket pocket, a silent witness to the storm, a tether to a world he feared he might never see again. Harper's Mustang roared as he climbed back toward the safety of higher altitude, the wind biting at his face, the clouds parting to reveal the faint glimmer of sunlight. For a brief moment, the chaos seemed to pause. He allowed himself a small exhale, fingers brushing the envelope again. He had survived another mission. He had survived to write another letter. And though the war was far from over, he carried within him a promise that transcended time and conflict, the promise to return, the promise to endure, and the promise that Mary would one day know the truth of his heart. But fate is a cruel companion in wartime. Harper did not yet know that the events of this day would be the last he would witness. That the letter he held, carefully penned with trembling hands and unwavering hope, would remain hidden for decades, waiting to tell a story of courage, love, and the enduring human spirit. The promise he had made, now more fragile than ever, would survive the passage of time, hidden from view until the world was ready to remember the pilot who disappeared into the clouds 50 years ago. The pilot's promise. The afternoon sun was a weak glow behind heavy gray clouds as Harper and his squadron navigated back across northern France. The chaos of the bombing run had subsided, but the danger had not. Every shadow, every cloud bank, every tree-line below could conceal the deadly gaze of German fighters. Harper's mind was a careful balance of focus and exhaustion. He monitored the gauges, scanned the sky, and mentally calculated escape vectors, all while the letter remained a tangible weight against his chest, a promise and a memory rolled into one fragile envelope. Flak still rained intermittently as they neared the coast, and the radio crackled with intermittent static and muffled voices. "Lead, you're clear to descend. Watch the anti-aircraft positions near the coast," a voice warned. Harper nodded, though the pilot beside him could not see the gesture. He signaled instead, a quick flick of the hand. Descending meant exposure, but circling higher meant running the risk of interception by the Luftwaffe. The first warning came as a shadow against the clouds, a Messerschmitt Bf 109 diving at high speed. Harper's heart surged with adrenaline. He gripped the control yoke, pushed the Mustang into a sharp roll, and fired in short, controlled bursts. The enemy fighter twisted violently, smoke trailing from its engine. Harper tracked it until it disappeared behind a curtain of clouds. "Nice hit," called Lieutenant Douglas, a voice tight with excitement over the radio. But Harper didn't answer. His eyes scanned the horizon. He knew there would be more. There always was. Minutes later, it came. A second, third, then a fourth wave of enemy fighters, expertly coordinated, striking with precision from the sun's glare. Harper's squadron split into evasive maneuvers. Twisting, diving, rolling, air combat was chaos given shape by instinct and training. Tracers sliced through the clouds like deadly ribbons, engines screamed, and the smell of oil and exhaust burned in Harper's nostrils. Amidst the storm of flight and fire, Harper's thoughts flickered to home. The letter. He imagined Mary reading it, smiling despite her tears. He imagined their mother clutching the envelope to her chest, whispering his name in gratitude and worry. He imagined a world where he could safely return, a world where these skies were no longer filled with death. And then reality crashed back. A Messerschmitt came screaming in from his 6 o'clock position. Harper rolled violently, bullets tearing through the fuselage, but he knew he had to keep control. His Mustang groaned under the strain, but it held. Minutes stretched into a blur. Enemy fighters swarmed like locusts. Flak splashed against the clouds and fields below. One by one, Harper's squadron reported hits, damage, or missing wingmen. The radio was alive with urgent calls. "Need cover." "Wingman down." "Pull up." Harper followed instinct, training, and courage, executing evasive maneuvers with precision, his Mustang responding like a trusted steed in a deadly dance. And then the moment that would change everything, a sudden jolt, a violent explosion against the fuselage. Harper was thrown forward as the Mustang shuddered under fire. Smoke filled the cockpit. The canopy glass had cracked. Instruments flared, and the engine sputtered, coughing in protest. Harper's heart pounded. He fought to keep control, but the damage was severe. He radioed a terse report. "Lead to base. Mustang hit, cannot maintain formation, heading for the coast, may need to bail out." Static followed. Then silence. Below, the gray waters of the English Channel stretched endlessly, cold and uninviting. Harper's training kicked in. He assessed altitude, speed, and trajectory. The Mustang was faltering, each second bringing him closer to a forced landing, or worse. He reached for the emergency release, the small hatch that could mean survival. But hesitation gripped him. If he abandoned the plane, he left behind the letter, the promise, the very essence of who he was in that fragile envelope. Harper's thoughts turned inward, to Mary, to home, to everything he had fought for. He whispered her name under his breath, a mantra of courage. Then, with a deep breath, he unbuckled the harness and prepared to jump, knowing that even in the chaos, some control remained. He leapt. The wind ripped past him, a force both liberating and terrifying. The Mustang spiraled downward, a flaming comet against the gray sky. Harper's chute deployed, snapping open with a violent tug. He hung there, suspended between earth and sky, alive yet perilously exposed. The cold wind bit at his face, pulling tears and sweat alike. Below, the channel churned, dark and forbidding. The coast was miles away, the enemy perhaps closer. As he drifted downward, Harper remembered the letter. He had tucked it deep in his jacket pocket, close to his chest, and by some miracle, it had survived the Mustang's collapse. That small piece of paper represented more than words. It was a tether to life, a bridge to the future. He imagined it reaching Mary, decades from now, telling a story of hope, courage, and enduring love. The landing in the channel was brutal. Harper hit the freezing water with a violent splash, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. He surfaced, gasping, eyes stinging with salt and cold. The parachute tangled around his limbs, dragging him, threatening to pull him under. Harper fought it free, cutting straps with a small survival knife he always carried. The waters were merciless, waves battering him, currents threatening to sweep him away. And then he saw it, a small piece of debris, flotsam from his Mustang, a twisted shard of metal marking where the plane had disappeared beneath the waves. Harper swam, fighting exhaustion, hypothermia, and the creeping despair that threatened to paralyze him. Hours seemed to pass. The channel stretched endlessly, a gray void. He drifted, cold and numb, until finally, he was spotted. Not by rescue boats, but by the enemy. German patrols combed the waters. Harper knew he could not survive a capture. He had seen what befell others in the hands of the Kriegsmarine. He submerged briefly, holding his breath, using currents and shadows to hide his approach to the coast. Night fell, a heavy curtain of darkness. Harper crawled ashore onto a rocky beach, every muscle screaming, lungs burning, body numb from cold. The letter remained pressed against his chest, miraculously intact. Harper knew it was his duty, his purpose, and perhaps the only reason he survived. He took shelter in the dunes, shivering, wet, and exhausted, eyes scanning the horizon. Somewhere inland lay the occupied territory, and somewhere, danger waited. Harper survived that night, but the mission, the Mustang, and the skies of northern France had claimed more than his plane. They claimed certainty. He could no longer trust that returning home was inevitable. The war was unpredictable, merciless, and chaotic. He moved inland cautiously, avoiding patrols, scavenging for food and warmth. Every day became a battle of endurance. Hunger gnawed at him, frostbite threatened, and the constant fear of discovery pressed down like a physical weight. Yet Harper carried on. Each night, he held the letter close, reading it, whispering the words he had written to Mary, imagining her smile. That fragile piece of paper became his compass, guiding him through forests, fields, and villages, keeping him alive when hope seemed impossible. He understood, perhaps more profoundly than ever, that human connections, promises, and memories were stronger than bullets, stronger than fear, stronger than the war itself. Weeks passed. Harper's survival was a daily miracle. He moved under cover of darkness, sought shelter from sympathetic villagers, and avoided contact with the occupying forces whenever possible. And all the while, he carried the letter, knowing that one day it would reach its intended recipient. That one day, his promise would be fulfilled. By the time Allied forces liberated the region months later, Harper was nowhere to be found. Search parties combed the forests and towns, asking questions, seeking information, and listening for news. But the war had swallowed him, leaving only fragments of his presence, the wreckage of a Mustang, scattered personal effects, and whispers of a man who survived against all odds. Decades passed. Families mourned, communities remembered, but Harper remained lost to the world, a ghost of the skies he had once dominated. The letter, preserved through improbable luck, was folded carefully in a safe place, waiting for the moment when it could tell the story of a pilot, a promise, and the endurance of the human spirit beyond the horrors of war. And so, Harper's story, intertwined with a single piece of paper, a fragile promise, and the endless skies over Europe, continued, not in the roar of engines or the flash of gunfire, but in the quiet hope that some truths, some promises, survive beyond the reach of time. The pilot's promise. The forest stretched endlessly before Harper, a dense labyrinth of twisted trees, thick undergrowth, and shadows that shifted like living creatures. Every snap of a twig beneath his boots made him flinch, expecting German patrols to appear from the darkness. Hunger clawed at his stomach, cold seeped into his bones, and exhaustion pressed like a lead weight on his shoulders, yet Harper moved onward. The letter, still tucked deep inside his jacket pocket, pressed close to his chest as if reminding him why he endured. He had learned to read the forest in a new language. Bird calls marked the direction of water sources. Broken branches and crushed leaves whispered of approaching danger, or of the passage of villagers sympathetic to the Allies. Every sound, every scent, every shadow became a critical clue. Harper survived not just because of skill, but because the human instinct for survival had sharpened to a razor's edge. By the third day, Harper's supplies had dwindled to almost nothing. He had scavenged bits of bread from abandoned farmhouses, sipped water from cold streams, and survived off roots and berries when necessary. Each night, he huddled beneath a blanket of leaves, wrapped in his flight jacket, the letter his only companion. He read it over and over. "Mary, if this reaches you, know that I have fought with every ounce of my strength to keep the promise I made. No matter what happens, I will carry our hope, our love, and our dream of a future beyond this war." The words gave Harper strength. Every day, the forest became less threatening in some ways, a place where he could hide, but more dangerous in others. German patrols were everywhere, and their intelligence about downed Allied pilots had grown sharper as the months dragged on. Harper had learned to move silently, to sleep in hidden spots beneath dense canopies, and to trust no one completely. Yet in the midst of fear, he also discovered small acts of kindness, villagers who offered water secretly at night, a hidden basket of food left along a forest path, whispered directions that might lead him closer to safety. These fleeting interactions reminded Harper that not all of humanity was lost to war. By the end of the first week behind enemy lines, Harper faced a new danger: injury. A sharp fall over a hidden root left him with a twisted ankle, sharp pain shooting up his leg with every step. He rested beneath a fallen tree, wrapping the ankle as best he could with a torn sleeve. His movements became slow, deliberate, and even more cautious. Every day was measured in survival: find food, find water, avoid capture, move closer to liberation, and never let go of hope. Nightfall was both his enemy and his savior. Darkness hid him from patrols, but it also brought a deep loneliness, a silence broken only by the distant sounds of gunfire or the rustling of nocturnal creatures. Harper clutched the letter in moments like these, reading it aloud softly, whispering each word as though Mary herself were there beside him, giving him courage. It was more than a piece of paper, it was a lifeline, a tangible connection to home, to love, to the promise of a world beyond blood and fire. Weeks turned into a month. Harper had moved dozens of miles, avoiding towns, sleeping in barns, hiding in haylofts, and living off what the forest reluctantly offered. Each day became a test of endurance. His physical condition deteriorated, his ribs ached, muscles ached, and hunger gnawed relentlessly. Yet his determination never wavered. He had survived the crash, the enemy, and the unforgiving channel, and now, he would survive the forest, the occupation, and his own doubts. One night, Harper heard a whisper of voices. He froze, pressing himself against the thick tree trunk, ears straining. German soldiers were passing nearby, their boots crunching over leaves, their rifles slung casually but ready. Harper held his breath, heart hammering in his chest. The patrol lingered just long enough to fill the air with danger before disappearing into the darkness. Harper exhaled slowly, silent tears of relief mixing with dirt and sweat. He realized then that time itself had become distorted. Days, nights, and weeks blurred into one continuous struggle. He no longer measured life by hours, but by moments of survival, a hidden berry patch, a clean stream, a silent night. And yet, the letter remained untouched by the chaos around him, preserved as carefully as he preserved his own life. One afternoon, Harper stumbled upon a small village partially abandoned due to the occupation. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, children's laughter echoing faintly despite the ever-present tension. Harper observed from the shadows, heart torn between hunger, the need for information, and the risk of exposure. He noticed a small group of villagers moving stealthily, perhaps resistance members. He waited until nightfall to approach, moving like a shadow. He had learned patience and timing in these weeks better than any combat maneuver. One of the villagers noticed him, startled, but Harper raised his hands in surrender, revealing nothing but exhaustion and wear. A tense moment passed. Then, in hushed whispers, a woman stepped forward. You are an Allied pilot?" she asked, eyes wide but not unkind. Harper nodded, showing her the letter. Her hands trembled as she took it. This is important," she asked. Harper nodded again. The woman and her companions guided him to a hidden barn on the outskirts of the village. Inside, Harper found warmth, food, and clean water, luxuries he had forgotten existed. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax, to feel human again. And yet, even in comfort, Harper never let his guard down entirely. The letter was always close, a reminder of duty, hope, and the promise that had guided him this far. As Harper rested, the villagers spoke in whispers of the resistance efforts, sabotage missions, secret supply lines, and information about German troop movements. Harper realized he could not remain hidden indefinitely. The liberation of the area was approaching, but he also knew that the window for safe passage was narrow. Exposure could mean death, capture, or worse. The letter had given him the strength to survive, and now it would guide him to make a crucial decision: trust the villagers, use their network, and risk everything to reach Allied forces, or continue alone, relying only on his instincts and endurance. Harper chose the network. With careful planning, he moved under cover of night, guided by the villagers, across fields, rivers, and abandoned roads. They avoided patrols, used secret signals, and stayed in the shadows, each step bringing Harper closer to liberation. Along the way, Harper began documenting his journey, not for official records, but for the letter. He wrote down details of survival, encounters with villagers, and moments of despair and hope. Each note was intended to accompany the letter, so that Mary and future generations could understand not just the promise, but the struggle, the courage, and the human cost of war. One particularly harrowing night, the group encountered a German checkpoint. Harper froze, heart in his throat, as the soldiers began questioning the travelers. One misstep, one false answer, and he would be gone, either executed or sent to a POW camp. Harper's mind raced. He recalled the letter in his pocket, its weight reminding him of what he was fighting for. With calm precision, he mimicked the villagers' gestures, answered questions, and moved with practiced stealth. The checkpoint passed without incident, and Harper exhaled, allowing himself the briefest moment of relief before moving on. Finally, after weeks of evasion, Harper reached a location where Allied forces were advancing. The sight of American soldiers brought tears to his eyes. He emerged from the shadows, hands raised, and was met with caution, then recognition. "Pilot! You made it," an officer exclaimed. Harper collapsed into their care, exhausted beyond words, yet holding the letter tightly. The letter, intact despite months of war, loss, and near death, had survived just as Harper had. It represented not just survival, but the enduring connection between hope and human determination. Harper knew that returning to Mary, sharing this letter, and keeping his promise was the next battle, one of life, love, and remembrance beyond the horrors he had endured. As he was debriefed, Harper could not stop thinking about the months behind enemy lines, the villagers who had saved him, the forests that had tested every instinct, and the relentless push to preserve a single promise through chaos and destruction. The letter had been more than paper, it had been his compass, his motivation, and his tether to a world worth fighting for. And so, Harper's journey continued, not only as a pilot who had survived against impossible odds, but as a man carrying a promise written decades ago, preserved through peril, war, and time itself. The story of that letter, and of the human spirit it represented, was only beginning to be told. The pilot's promise. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, washing the war-torn landscape in soft, golden hues. Harper felt its warmth on his face, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, letting the air fill his lungs as if drawing life from the morning itself. The forest behind him was silent, almost reverent, bearing witness to the trials he had endured and the countless nights spent evading death. Each step toward the distant village was heavy, yet purposeful. Harper's legs, though stiff and sore, carried him with unwavering resolve. The letter pressed to his chest had survived the worst the war could throw at him, and it had been his constant companion, a lifeline tethering him to hope, to Mary, and to a future he could scarcely imagine. As he approached the outskirts of the village, the familiar faces of those who had helped him blinked into view. Villagers who had risked their own lives to shelter him during the darkest nights now stood quietly, their expressions a mix of awe, relief, and respect. Harper stopped briefly, nodding in silent gratitude, his heart swelling at the sight of these ordinary heroes whose courage had been extraordinary in every sense. One woman, her hands weathered and strong, pressed a small satchel into his hands. "Go! The Allied forces are near. You can make it now," she whispered. Harper only nodded, the words catching in his throat. The path ahead was fraught with danger. Mines still lay hidden in abandoned fields, and German patrols had not entirely disappeared from the roads. Every shadow seemed a potential threat, every sound a harbinger of death. But Harper moved steadily forward, each careful step measured, deliberate, guided by the memory of Mary and the promise etched in the letter he had sworn to deliver. Hours passed, each one blending into the next, the rhythm of Harper's march punctuated by distant gunfire and the low hum of approaching Allied vehicles. Eventually, he reached a ridge overlooking a valley below. The sight took his breath away. Allied soldiers, their uniforms crisp despite the chaos, advanced in formation, tanks rumbling behind them, flags fluttering proudly in the morning breeze. Harper's heart leaped. He had made it. The impossible was behind him. And then, a German soldier emerged from the underbrush. Harper froze, heart pounding violently in his chest. The soldier, however, raised a hand in surrender, wary of the approaching Allied column. Harper exhaled, relief washing over him in a rush, and continued forward, eventually collapsing into the care of medics who rushed to his side. Their hands were firm, reassuring, but Harper hardly noticed. His gaze remained fixed on the letter, still tucked securely in his pocket, a testament to the hope that had carried him through unthinkable peril. Over the following days, Harper was debriefed and reunited with surviving members of his unit. Yet even in their presence, his thoughts remained on Mary, the letter, and the promise that had kept him alive. He recounted little of the horrors he had witnessed, but in private moments, the memories of dark forests, relentless patrols, and nights shrouded in fear returned to him with startling clarity. Finally, the day arrived when Harper could journey home. The streets of his town seemed both familiar and strange, buildings scarred, roads quiet, life attempting to resume after years of chaos. And then, he saw her. Mary stood at the doorway, eyes wide, lips trembling, as if she could not quite believe the sight before her. Time seemed to collapse, every fear, every longing, every sleepless night fading in the brilliance of that single moment. Harper walked to her, hands trembling, and produced the letter. Mary took it with care, her fingers brushing the familiar handwriting, tracing the words that had bridged the gap of months, perhaps even years. "You kept your promise," she whispered, tears streaming freely down her face. Harper nodded, words failing him, overcome by the gravity of survival, love, and the extraordinary weight carried in a simple folded sheet of paper. Months passed, and Harper recounted his journey to Mary in painstaking detail. He spoke of the villagers who had risked everything, the constant threat of capture, the nights spent whispering words of hope into darkness. The letter remained central to their story, a symbol not just of survival, but of perseverance, courage, and the power of a promise kept against impossible odds. In time, the letter became more than a personal keepsake. Historians and researchers recognized its significance, examining it not only as a record of one man's extraordinary experience but as a window into the human dimension of war. Harper's account illuminated the bravery of civilians who protected strangers, the psychological and physical endurance of soldiers, and the immense impact of personal determination in the midst of global conflict. On the 50th anniversary of his disappearance, the letter resurfaced in a remarkable discovery. Stored carefully in Harper's belongings, the ink had faded slightly, the paper softened by time, yet the words remained as potent as ever. Scholars marveled at the journey it represented, a letter written in hope, carried through unimaginable adversity, and ultimately returned to its intended recipient after decades. Harper's story became emblematic of the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of love and loyalty. Harper, now elderly, reflected on his journey. He remembered the dense forests, the lurking dangers, the constant threat of death, and the nights of isolation and fear. Yet, above all, he remembered the promise he had made in the unwavering faith it inspired. Mary had been his anchor, and the letter had been his compass, guiding him through darkness, uncertainty, and the chaos of war. The preservation of the letter became a priority for Harper and Mary. It was framed carefully, displayed for posterity, and treated with the reverence it deserved. Each visitor who read it was struck by the eloquence, the courage, and the enduring hope embedded within. What had begun as a personal communication between two hearts had grown into a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, human determination could prevail. As the decades passed, Harper's story inspired countless individuals. Veterans, historians, students, and ordinary people marveled at the journey of a young pilot who had faced insurmountable odds yet kept a promise with unwavering devotion. The letter stood as a testament not only to survival but to the extraordinary power of hope, courage, and the human spirit. In his final years, Harper found peace in knowing that his promise had been fulfilled. The letter had endured the trials of war, the passage of time, and the fragility of human life. It remained a living legacy, a bridge across generations, a message of courage, love, and the enduring power of promises kept. When Harper passed quietly, surrounded by loved ones, the letter remained. It was a symbol, a silent witness to a story of bravery, determination, and unwavering devotion. Its words had outlasted the chaos of war, the fear of uncertainty, and the shadow of mortality. The pilot's promise had transcended time, leaving an indelible mark on history, on those who read it, and on the generations who would carry its lessons forward. The story of Harper and his letter became more than history, it became inspiration. Museums preserved it, schools taught its significance, and the world remembered the extraordinary journey of a man who had faced death, adversity, and the unknown, and had emerged victorious, guided by hope, courage, and a simple promise. In the end, the pilot's promise stood as a universal truth, that even in the darkest moments, a single act of fidelity, a single unwavering commitment, can illuminate the world, inspire hearts, and transcend the boundaries of time. The letter remained, silent but powerful, a reminder of the enduring strength of the human spirit, the courage of the individual, and the boundless potential of love and hope. Harper's legacy endured through that letter, teaching generations that promises are not mere words, they are lifelines, guiding us through uncertainty, connecting hearts across time, and proving that even in war, even in despair, humanity can triumph. The pilot's promise, once written in fear and hope, had become a story of enduring courage, a testament to resilience, and a symbol of the profound impact of human determination. And though Harper himself was gone, the promise, preserved in ink and memory, continued to speak, reminding the world that hope, courage, and devotion can survive even the greatest trials, leaving a legacy that is timeless, unforgettable, and eternal.